Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to lead the debate. And I want to thank my colleague and Member of Parliament for New Westminster Burnaby for the support on this, as well as my entire caucus. I want to start by saying people around the world are looking at Canada right now, looking at Ottawa right now, and asking what's happening. Let me talk about the convoy protests. And let me begin by talking about what they are not. This protest, this convoy protest, is not a peaceful protest. There's a often used saying, if people continue to show you who they are, then you've got to start believing them. This is what the convoy's been about. Hateful symbols like the Nazi flag and the Confederate flag from the beginning have been displayed at this convoy. This has clearly made Jewish and Muslim Canadians and racialized Canadians scared of violence. We heard it clearly in this House in really eloquent words, what it means to a racialized person to see those flags. We have seen the harassment of citizens. And what is really unique about this, normally protests target the government policies, government decisions. But we see in this convoy that the target of the vast majority of the harassing behavior are citizens. They are harassing workers and citizens, including journalists. Violence is commonplace. We saw an example of this violence, an attempted arson downtown of an apartment building where people started a fire. When they exited, they taped the door. Take a moment to think what that means. They had the forethought that they wanted to set a fire and then tape the door to escape. This is not isolated. These are ongoing examples. Healthcare workers who you would think in a pandemic, the people that have been saving our lives, the people in regular life that save our lives, the people that help deliver my baby girl, these healthcare workers are being targeted by intimidation. What protest targets healthcare workers to the point that security and police are saying to healthcare workers, don't wear your scrubs, don't wear clothing that identifies you as a healthcare worker because you may be verbally or physically assaulted. That's a reality. That's happening right now. So it's certainly not peaceful. The number of complaints of harassment, of violence, of intimidation, targeting citizens, targeting families and kids by the honking and the noise and the fireworks that really are disrupting the lives of families. Most of that activity happens at night when there's no one in Parliament. So they're clearly not targeting Parliament. The convoy is certainly not about helping workers or small businesses hurt by the lockdowns. The behavior and activity of this convoy has directly impacted workers. The blockade at the Coutts border crossing is directly impacting truckers. Truckers are being prevented from coming across the border, Canadian truckers, mind you, that can't even get back home, can't bring goods into Canada because this convoy is blocking them from getting across the border. These are truckers who I've spoken with who are telling me that the conditions were pretty dire at Coutts. There is no facilities for food or water or washroom. They're running out of food and water, and they don't have the facilities to go to the washroom. And their trucks, while they were waiting for days, were running out of gas and running out of battery because they were stopped from getting across the border. Here in Ottawa, thousands of workers have lost wages because they are not able to work in what many have described as some of the worst of the lockdown. By convoy protesters who are talking about ending lockdowns have created some of the worst lockdowns where businesses were forced to shut down. Workers couldn't get to their jobs and small businesses had to shut down. We also heard multiple reports of retail workers being harassed for wearing masks, including young people. It's not even about truckers. I mentioned that the truckers that were being stopped, but the vast majority of truckers are vaccinated. This is not a concern from them. The convoy does not represent their concerns, and they have concerns. Their concerns, truckers' actual concerns, if you speak with truckers and trucking associations, their concerns are wage theft. Often they're not getting paid the wages that they are entitled to after work that they've done. They're concerned about salaries in general, not having good pay. They're concerned about work conditions, not having safe work conditions. They're concerned about the cost of insurance. They're concerned about long driving hours that compromise their health and safety. That's their concerns. Those concerns aren't being raised. And the thing is, the occupiers, the organizers of this occupation, have been very clear about their intention. They displayed it brazenly on their website with their MOU. They wanted to take over the streets of Ottawa and use intimidation to replace a democratically elected government. That was their stated intention. They stated it really clearly. They want to meet with the Senate and the Governor General and put in place an unelected committee to make decisions, replacing the democratically elected officials that are in this House of Commons. And what's been the response to this crisis? And the reason for this emergency debate? We are in a crisis. We're seeing this crisis spread beyond Ottawa to cities like Quebec, Montreal, Vancouver, Winnipeg, Sarnia, the border crossing, as well as Coutts in Alberta with the border with Montana. And what's the response been to this crisis? Well, the official opposition of Canada, what have they done? They have encouraged it. They've emboldened those who are harassing and intimidating their fellow citizens. That's been the response. The party of so-called law and order has embraced lawlessness and mob rule in the hope to gain political points. They're seeking political advantage by endorsing lawlessness and mob rule that harasses people, families, children, citizens. They've excused every incidence of violence by claiming it's just a few bad apples, or in a very Trumpian turn, unsurprisingly, that there are very good people on both sides. Ludicrous. And the federal government has claimed that they're outraged. But ultimately, their answer to this problem, like so many others, is to say it's not their job. Now, I agree that they have offered help, but let's not ignore the fact that they've repeatedly said it's not their jurisdiction. And for everyone out there who likes to talk about jurisdiction, of course, we have a constitution that outlines the divisions of power and the responsibilities at different levels of government. But in a crisis, no one, no real person who's living in the crisis, no real family who's struggling with the honking day and night, who's got children that they can't get to school, small businesses that have been forced to shut down, real truckers who are worried about legitimate issues that this convoy doesn't represent, real people. They are not interested in arguments over jurisdiction. I want that to be clear. Normal humans, real people in Canada are not worried about jurisdiction. They want to see solutions. They want to see help. They want to see the problem fixed. That's what people want. They don't want to see people searching for excuses. They want to see leaders find solutions. And that's what I believe. I believe a leader is someone who looks for a solution, doesn't try to find an excuse. At the same time that Liberal cabinet ministers and MPs were claiming that they had done everything they could and that the city of Ottawa, in this case, had everything they needed, the city of Ottawa officials were pleading for more help. Effectively, all three levels of government have essentially told Canadians, and the people in Ottawa particularly, that you're on your own. The only progress into getting some real change in this occupation of Ottawa came from a court injunction won by a 21-year-old resident of Ottawa with the help of her lawyers. So I want to outline some of the things that we can and must do at the federal level, that members of parliament can and must do, not only to end this occupation, but to help Canadians get to the other side of this pandemic. First off, the federal government has to stop using jurisdiction as an excuse for inaction. It's simply wrong. Today we hear that there is an attempt, there is an offer, or there's a start of discussions between three levels of government that the federal government will work with municipal and provincial levels of government. Today, after almost 10 days of occupation, that Prime Minister should have been working on this from the beginning, bringing all levels of government together immediately. Once they saw the level of this crisis, once they saw the severity of it, that step should have been taken right away. Clearly, this situation was not well handled, and it should not have taken this long to realize that. The convoy organizers were clear about their intent from the beginning. They were allowed to do exactly what they said they would do. Ottawa and other communities are asking for help, and it's not time to argue, it's time to deliver the help. So we want to see the federal government step up and provide the help necessary to these municipalities. The Prime Minister should be meeting with the mayors and municipalities impacted and providing proactive help. Secondly, the federal government needs to use its authority and all the laws and tools that it has to shut down the funding of this occupation. Canadians are demanding answers about who funded this and who's encouraging this, and so are we. The same forces that fed divisions and intolerance and violence in the United States, those that supported Donald Trump, are now trying to interfere with our democracy. It is very clear. The intent of this convoy was to undermine democracy, and the foreign dollars that are funding this, that is political interference, are coming from the United States. The federal government has to use its tools to stop that funding. Thirdly, we need a plan. Canadians need to know what the plan is to get us to the other side of this pandemic. The vast majority of Canadians have been vaccinated. They have done their part. They have worn masks. They continue to follow healthcare guidelines and public health guidelines. But they're asking, what's next? How do we get past this pandemic? How do we get to the other side? What now do we need to do? People need a plan. They need a clear plan, and we're asking Canadians, we're asking the federal government to work with provinces and territories and public health officials to develop that plan. People have done everything. They've got vaccinated. They've missed time with friends and family. They put off celebrations. They've endured the loss of loved ones. Now we owe it to Canadians to lay out a plan for how we get to the other side of this. And this plan is going to require testing to make sure we know if we're sick, if people are sick, so they can prevent the spread. It's also going to mean that we help people to continue to get vaccinated. And that's not just here in Canada, but around the world. Because we know that the government can't keep putting the mega profits of pharmaceutical companies ahead of the health of everyone else. It's clear this virus will continue to keep mutating and new waves will arise and keep coming until we make sure the vaccine is available to everyone. So we need to do everything we can to make sure the vaccine is available to everyone. And we also need an emergency rescue mission for our healthcare system. For those people who've been worked to exhaustion, for our healthcare workers, for nurses, for those folks who put their lives on the line and protected us and cared for us, they need help. Our healthcare system has been pushed to the brink, and it is frankly inexcusable that 2 years into the pandemic, every outbreak, every new wave pushes our healthcare system to the brink again and again. We need sustainable, long-lasting funding to make sure our healthcare system is adequately resourced to deal with the pressures and demands. On top of that, people are paying the price of this pandemic with their lives. Cancer diagnoses and other serious illnesses are getting worse because people can't get access to the care that they need. Many people are living in pain because surgeries have been canceled. And people living with disabilities and those who are more likely to get sick and die from COVID-19 are terrified. They're terrified that if public health restrictions are lifted, it's their health and safety that will be sacrificed. So Canadians are angry, and rightfully so. They're angry because they've seen that keeping profits flowing to millionaires and billionaires is more important than keeping their schools open. Many times in this pandemic, big box stores were open, but kids couldn't go to school. They're angry that food costs more and that grocery store owners make bigger and bigger profits while frontline workers get their pay cut. People are angry that so many of the cracks exposed by this pandemic still have no solution, like in long-term care or in Indigenous communities where the lack of decent housing and clean drinking water mean that the pandemic has hit them harder. People are angry and scared that the climate crisis is threatening their homes and livelihoods with more extreme weather, like floods and fires. So we need to have a plan to respond to that. And we need to work together to deal with the issues facing Canadians. We were sent here just 6 months ago, elected in a minority government to get to work for people. We need to meet the real anger and frustration that people are experiencing right now with a clear vision about how to make life better. This starts by addressing the things that have clearly gotten worse in this pandemic, like finding a place to call home. It is simply impossible for so many Canadians to be able to find a roof over their heads, to find a home that's in their budget. That has to be fixed. Life is getting harder. People can't afford their groceries. They can't pay the bills. But it's not getting harder for everyone. The rich and powerful have gotten more rich and powerful throughout this pandemic. We've seen their wealth increase. So we need to restore the promise to Canadians that we can all share in a good future. Canadians sent us here not even 6 months ago to work for them, to deliver the solutions they need. We are committed to that, and we need to be committed to getting us through the pandemic and rebuilding this country in a way that is good for everyone. That is what we have to do now, and that is all of us in this house. J'ai dit que c'est vraiment.
I said that this situation is very difficult. What's happening in Ottawa is a crisis. This is a crisis because this convoy is targeting citizens, workers, families, and this type of protest is spreading across the country. We saw the same thing in Quebec City, and they said that they were going to return. So I have a solution. We've seen a lack of leadership on the part of the federal government. The federal government simply wasn't there to show leadership in this crisis. So we're calling on the federal government to meet with the mayors who have been hit by these protests. The Prime Minister must meet with them. And the federal government cannot continue to make excuses. It has to find solutions. It is clear that there is foreign interference in this convoy. There's a great deal of money flowing in from abroad, specifically from the United States. So we have to use federal intervention to stop this funding. Third, we need a plan. People have done everything right. They've gotten vaccinated. They've followed health measures. They've followed public health directives. But now they don't know what the plan is to emerge from the pandemic. Canadians deserve a plan. The federal government must work with the provinces and territories and with public health experts to put forward a clear plan to emerge from this pandemic. And this plan must include an increase in funding for our health care, because it's inexcusable that after 2 years of this pandemic, every time there's a new wave of COVID, we see that our healthcare system is on the brink, and that is unacceptable. And lastly, we need to work together to solve the problems that people are dealing with. Housing prices, the cost of living, we have to solve these problems. Thank you.